what we encourage our clients to do is to just keep a record of proactive initiatives that you're giving to the client, because it's always pretty useful when you come to contract renegotiation every year to be able to show the amount of added value that you're actually bringing.
Welcome to the Creative Agency Account Manager podcast. I'm Jenny Plant, and I'm on a mission to help account managers understand the agency business and develop an entrepreneurial mindset in their role so they can show up as a commercially aware advisor to their clients rather than a reactive order taker. I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about my next guests, because I met Simon and Carey from Relationship Audits many years ago when I was working as Client Services Director for Publicis Life Brands. We were struggling with a client relationship. It was a big deal for us, this client. It was a very important client, but it wasn't going well. And I won't share all the details as to why it wasn't going well, but part of it we knew why it wasn't going well, but some of it we didn't. So we invited in Simon and Carey to evaluate our relationship. And essentially what they did was to go in and interview all of the key client stakeholders to find out what was going on, what was their perception of the agency. But more than that, what they were able to do was not only uncover what was going well, what wasn't going well, they also uncovered growth opportunities for us as an agency to then go back into the client and crystallize what they needed in the future and provide extra value. So I always say that if we hadn't have done that and they hadn't have provided that action list and the report and all the findings and their recommendations, we wouldn't have retained that client. And when you think that that client was roughly worth to the agency about $700,000 a year, I think as a result of that insight that they uncovered, we were able to extend the life of that relationship by 2 years. So immediately, the return on investment for employing the services of Relationship Audits just changed the game for us. So that's why I am delighted that they've joined us back on the show today. They've already been on the show a couple of times, and we're going to talk about what your clients don't tell you. Because whilst you might be evaluating the strength of your relationships with your clients and asking them questions, what RAM do, and they've been doing it for absolutely years and years and years, is listen for what's not being said. And they have a very established question set, and they're able to spot things that you will miss. So today we're going to talk about what your clients don't tell you. And I would like to go over to Simon and Carey now for a brief introduction about RAM and what they do for agencies. And then we're going to ask them some questions. So Simon, can I start with you?
Thank you, Jenny. And it's great to be on the show. We started RAM probably about over 25 years ago because we both worked in large agencies. Indeed, I had my own smaller branding agency. And what you realize is that sometimes clients put business elsewhere. Sometimes they take the business away, and it comes as a shock to the owners of the business that this business has gone. We think there is a difference between perception and reality. How well you think you're doing and how well the client really thinks you're actually doing. And we felt that there was a gap in the market to independently go and assess business relationships, because people tend to be more open, honest and transparent with a third party than necessarily the people that they're working with on a day-to-day basis. Carey, would you add anything to that?
No. All I'd like to say really is that we started off with relationship audits, working with agencies, and then gravitated onto other kinds of people who provide services like lawyers and accountants, people like that, financial services people. And interestingly, we found that within those industries, even though they were quite different from marketing services and advertising and agencies and all that stuff, the reality is that the issues were exactly the same, right? They may be framed in different deliverables, but the issue of the strength of the relationship and what you know versus what you think you know come up in all service provision. And the other thing I think that's worth talking about is that one of the things that we were able to bring to the party, so to speak, is that we don't just work for the people like agencies who provide services. We work for the client companies for whom they provide those services. So we work for big multinational corporates to help them evaluate the relationship with their own suppliers and service providers. That gives us a unique position because we're able to see things all the time from both sides.
What I love about what you do, Carey, is every time I speak to you, you tell me what the clients are thinking and what they're saying. And oftentimes, because I train account managers in agencies, I'm talking to agencies all the time, this is exactly the insight that they need to know. So to that point, I'd like to go through a series of questions to ask you, because I think it's really important that agencies hear it from the horse's mouth, because you're having these client conversations all day, every day. What actually are they saying? So the first thing that it's a kind of frustration that I hear a lot from agency account managers. They say, do you know, Jenny, I can't get hold of my client. I've sent them an email and I've been waiting and they just haven't got back to me. And I think that perception from the agency side is that the client is waiting to respond. So can you speak to that issue a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a natural thing, because if when you're the agency and you're working on a particular client, that's the most important thing in your day, morning, lunch and evening. And if you are working to a deadline agreed with your client and you need a client to approve something you've provided, then you want to get hold of them so you can get on with it and deliver against the timing plan. The problem is that on the basis of what we know, a client spends round about 6 or 7% of their working week working with agencies and people who provide services like that. So the point about that is that you are a small part of what they do every day. And although you may be waiting for that call, they may not be thinking about you for the vast majority of what they do during the day. So that's worth remembering. And the other thing I think that is related to that, if you know that they've got lots on their plate, find a time to get in touch with them when they are least likely to be involved in other things. So what we used to do was we used to try and get hold of people very early in the day, so 8 o'clock or something, particularly if you had a mobile number, less likely these days. But if you can try it early or late, whatever it is, then that's worth a shot, because at the end of the day, don't forget, they got lots of other things on their plate.
I think also it's particularly important when you start working with a client to set up as part of the onboarding exactly what Carey has actually said. And I think secondly, if you're having trouble getting hold of the client, you need to talk to the client and say, we're having trouble getting hold of you. Now, a lot of clients will say, here is an emergency time and an emergency number, because even if you do what Carey has said, there will be times when you need to get hold of people quickly. If you set up a formula for, if I need to reach you quickly, you do this, or I'm going to check in with you at a certain time, right at the beginning of a relationship. And if you're having trouble during that relationship, you bring it up. You don't get yourself het up that you can't get hold of the client. You bring it up early.
I think it reminds me of something that I remember. We were doing a piece of work for an agency where we were helping them assess the quality of the relationships that a target agency that they were looking to acquire had. And when we were setting up a series of interviews, one of the guys I was talking to said, what's the best way to get hold of you? And he said, WhatsApp. He said, just if you really need to get hold of me urgently, WhatsApp me. And I mean, yeah, why wouldn't you? But it's interesting. That's a relatively new thing. But, as Simon's right, the trick is to find out, okay, if I need to get hold of you, what do I do?
Yeah.
And you'll be glad you asked the question, by the way.
I think they're all of those are very brilliant tips. So
can I also to add something to that? It works the other way around, because some frustrations that clients have is they can't get hold of the agency. I was interviewing a client only this week who said, I don't know who my account manager is. So it can cause huge problems if a client who is very, very time poor, as Carey's explained, if there isn't a team sheet or a mechanism to actually get hold of people at the agency when they want to. Because at the end of the day, you are a service organisation. You're there to serve the client. And if you can't get hold of the people that you want to when you want to, ultimately they'll find people that can.
Very good. So I just want to do a quick summary. Carey, you talked about choosing the right time that suits with your client's schedule. Simon, you talked about agreeing at the beginning of the relationship rather than when you desperately need their approval, what the best method is. And as you said, choose the method. So is it WhatsApp? Is it a home phone call? Is it...
And it will differ for individuals.
Exactly. And make sure that the client also knows who to contact when they need to. So it brings me on nicely to my next question. We've talked about sort of setting expectations for clients from the beginning. But Carey, agencies are told to set expectations for the client. What are they going to expect from working with us? But how do you see setting expectations?
Yeah, I mean, this is very interesting now, because you can't, if you're going to be judged by your client, right, one of the things they're going to do is whether they say it or they don't, and sometimes whether they tell you or they don't tell you, is how they do against your expectations, right? So when we go and talk to an agency's clients, the first question we ask, apart from how are you and how's your business, is to ask them what their expectations of their agency are. And generally people say, oh, that's a good question, I haven't thought of that. Or they say, yeah, well, I know exactly what they are. Anyway, we then collect these expectations and we make note. And then what we started to do was to say to the client thereafter, so these are your expectations, blah, 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 blah. Tell me, do any of your agencies ask you what your expectations of them are? Now, the interesting thing about that is that on the basis of the research we've carried out, over 60% of clients say that their agency has never asked their client what his or her expectations of the agency are. So the question is, how can you exceed expectations if you don't know what they are, right? So rule one, if you've got a new relationship, ask what their expectations of the client's expectations are. And if that client moves on and another client moves in, don't assume that the new client's expectations will be the same as the last ones, because everybody's different, right?
And to that point, we were doing work on behalf of a very large branding agency a few years ago. And they had two very large clients. And the senior client from one company moved to become the senior client, funnily enough, of the other company that this same branding company worked with. And after about 6 months, we were called in because there were severe problems with that relationship. So we went to interview this chap. And it became very clear that the agency had assumed that this guy's expectations in his new company would be the same as his expectations in the other company. The clear message here is don't assume. Don't assume. There will inevitably probably be some similar expectations, like on brief, on budget, on time. But particularly the speed of which business is changing at the moment, there will be new expectations that will be coming in on a constant basis. And to Carey's point, unless you ask, you can't assume.
Can you give me some examples of the types of expectations that is being revealed in these interviews about actually what they wanted versus what they've got?
Yes. One of the things that is driving a lot of agency relationships is speed. speed to market, speed of turnaround is a critical business differentiator. What are the client's expectations in terms of how quickly they expect the agency to actually get back to them? If you're talking about a creative agency, one of the things that we often find is that even within a client's organization, what is deemed to be great creative actually varies between a product manager, a marketing director, even a chief executive. And just to tell you one short story, that we have a client who originally developed this concept for new business, but it actually works with existing clients, which is to actually hold a meeting with the entire client team and ask them to bring with them, each person, 3 examples of what is deemed to be great creative work and 3 examples of what they think is absolute rubbish. And indeed, the agency will do the same. But these examples of great creative can be ads, they can be TV programs, they can be works of art. But what it's designed to do is to get the client talking, to understand the adjectives and the way they talk about great work, the way they talk about poor work, and the agency actually does the same. And what that technique does is it actually fleshes out any inconsistencies, and it also helps the agency understand where the client is coming from. Because one of the biggest issues for any agency is just the scope and the amount of work that it's actually handling on a day-to-day basis. And if you can cut down the amount of reworks, you have, the chances are you have much better and higher quality creative, and it's more profitable.
Amazing. And so it's saving the agency time and money. I think it's a great point that you've made about showing or asking clients what they think is great creative, because everyone's going to have a different view of that. Have you noticed, Carey, as well, about expectations? Like, what are some of the things that you've heard from clients about expectations?
I think, it's interesting that sometimes what we find from clients and from interviewing clients is that agencies want to be seen to be doing. They want to be seen to do what they briefed, but they also want to be seen to being a partner, right? And being strategic. And sometimes the client's expectation is that they want what they have asked for delivered properly, on time, on brief, on budget. And unless you can do that bit, they're not interested in the extra bit. So do what you're supposed to do. The other interesting thing about expectations often is that a lot of clients say that what they don't get that they really want is proactive communication about where things are in the process, so that they get so that the agency is able to go back without being asked. And I think that's the really interesting thing, is that they're looking for the agency to do things without being asked. And that's not about doing a massive new proactive piece of work. It's just about, on the projects, communicating proactively so that the client knows before the client has to ask.
Can I just build on that? I think one of the things that most agencies will say to a new client, we're delighted to be working with you, and Jenny, we're your new partner. Wrong. Partnership is something that has to be earned by the agency. You have to become the trusted advisor. You can only do that over a period of time. Part of the way of doing that is to get some people call it brilliant basics. Deliver when you say you're going to deliver, on time, on budget, and on brief. But every client wants, actually no, most clients, not every client, most clients want added value. And it doesn't have to be the great earth-shattering initiative, but they want to feel that they're getting that bit extra. There was one client that Carey interviewed a number of years ago who used the great expression, I want some of their shower time. I want them to be thinking in the shower. And I think this guy had a whiteboard in his shower?
Yeah, he was,
Or at least he claimed to have a whiteboard in his shower?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure about that, but I asked him, what defines a great agency, and he says, he said, I just want their shower time. He said, in other words, thinking about his business when they're in the shower, out of work mode. Now, I think that might be something that's not seen as being particularly appropriate these days, but nevertheless, it does demonstrate a mentality of being seen to not just going the extra mile. And this is the crucial thing. It's about not just going the extra mile, it's being seen to go the extra mile. And one of the things that we find is that clients complain about things they haven't seen. And when you talk to the agency and they've said, we've done that. And the problem is, I remember this absolutely with an initiative for one agency that they mentioned this initiative. And I said, well, the CMO has not heard anything about this. And what had happened was that the initiative had been delivered below the level of CMO. That individual in the client team had not pushed upwards the fact that the agency had delivered this initiative. So when the agency talked to the CMO about the initiative, he didn't know what they were talking about, right? So what that means is, don't assume because you've delivered it that it'll be known that you've delivered by everybody who needs to know. Make sure you merchandise your delivery, because you'll be very glad that you did. If you then say that we've done this and he says, no, you haven't, and we say, yes, we have, no, you haven't. So get on the front foot, merchandise what you do.
How would you do that? Like, how do you merchandise what you do? For those listening to the podcast as an account manager, this all makes sense. And I'm sure people are thinking, actually, I've got an example too of a client contact that I've got. And actually, they're saying, yes, go ahead. But actually, we're doing stuff, but their boss hasn't signed it off, or there's some kind of internal misalignment. So can you give us some
one simple thing you can do is just ask the person to whom you've presented, has so-and-so seen this? Right? I know that's bleeding obvious, but if you don't ask that question, you don't get an answer to it. So yeah, the first thing you need to do is, or when you provide the initiative, ask them whether they are intending to show this up the line if they like it. And that gives you the opportunity to call the client or the in this example, the CMO, and say, have you seen this? So yeah, get on the front foot to do that.
And I think one of the great bits of advice in terms of proactivity came from a senior guy at a very well-known airline. And I was talking to this chap about being proactive. And I said to him, of course, if the agency are proactive, it makes you look good. And he said, yes and no. I said, what do you mean by no? And he said, well, great proactivity not only makes me look good, it makes my boss look good. And if you think about strategic proactivity, if you can think one level beyond, you're going to have a greater impact within the organization. I think one other thing that I would add is that sometimes bits of proactivity can be given or thrown away. And that what we encourage our clients to do is to just keep a record of proactive initiatives that you're giving to the client, because it's always pretty useful when you come to contract renegotiation every year to be able to show the amount of added value that you're actually bringing.
Love this. There's so many things that I just want to reflect on that you've dropped, lots of golden nuggets. Do the brilliant basics, do them well, be proactive, add value, demonstrate that you are thinking about them during that shower time. Make sure that everything that you do is being seen within the organisation, and also keep a record of what you've done.
Can I just add one other thing?
Please.
A number of years ago, I went to see an agency in South Africa, and they were the fastest growing agency in the country. And what they did incredibly well was build business from existing clients. And I asked them what their secret was. And he said, well, what we do is when we win a new client, we ask the client to come into the agency for one of what we call our last Thursdays, where we get all of the agency in. And what happens is that the client is either interviewed or makes a presentation about their business and about the challenges that they're facing and why they've appointed this agency. Then the creative director gets up and shows the rest of the agency the pitch-winning work. Because the larger the agency, the less you really know what's going on, even in your own agency. But the killer and the really clever bit is then the chief executive stands up and says, Mr. and Ms. Client, thank you very much indeed for coming in, and it's great to have you as part of our clients. But I now turn to everybody else that's not working on this client's business. If any of you have any ideas that can help their business beyond advertising and marketing, any ideas, bring them to the account director, bring them to me, and I tell you what, we'll pay you a bonus if you don't work on the business and the client implements this. Really simple idea.
Wow.
Clients love it. And as one client was latterly to say to me, he said, yeah, I may have a team of 8 or 10 people on the business, but I think I've got a team of 100 people on the business.
That's a very clever message to send out to the whole team in front of the clients. How that lands with the client is going to be, so what a great start. I think that's a fantastic tip. Let's go back to this understanding of the client's business. We've just talked about the client standing up in front of the whole agency, talking about their business. We've talked about the proactivity that's needed, the added value. Carey, can you talk to me about this kind of, how do we demonstrate that we're understanding their business or continuing to understand their business throughout the relationship and being proactive?
Right. There's one really easy way to do that. It's what we call leveraging learning, right? If you know your client's business very well, you know where the pressures and opportunities are in his business or her business, right? Now, if you're working in an agency, there will be a whole bunch of different clients that work in the agency. And you know what? Some other clients of the agency may have similar problems that have been resolved and solved by a particular approach by the agency. If you can take something that has been successful, share it with the client, or from one client to another, obviously respecting confidentiality, and then say, look, this is what worked in this market with a similar kind of problem. If we were to take this solution and cut a bit off here, build a bit on there, core idea remains the same, but reapplied for this market or these trends, this could give you the inside track, right? Now, it is a really, really simple thing to do. If you do this as an agency and you all share problem solution that can then be leveraged by other people in the agency to go to their clients when they have a similar problem. Or even if you want to keep your clients enthused and motivated by what the agency's doing, you can have regular sessions where you just go through issues that have been solved in a particular way, particularly if they're creative, because your client will then want a bit of that, right? So leveraging learning is the simple thing that will get you lots of client attention and focus. And you know what? It's wanted by every single client that we talk to. Every single client wants more leveraging learning. And no agency that I've come across or Simon's come across yet is delivering all the leveraging learning that clients want. So it's an opportunity, a real opportunity, and it's not difficult.
If you're a medium-sized or particularly a large agency, the way we talk about it is that a client comes to you and it's almost as if they go through a thought process, I'm joining a club. And if I join a club, there should be benefits of the club. And one of the fringe benefits, to Carey's point, is leveraging learning. Can I just add one other point? Is that to leverage learning, to be proactive, it's fundamental that you understand the client's business. When we first started, clients were falling over themselves to tell the agency about the business. I remember once when I had the branding company, we had a client in Burton-on-Trent that was on the phone to one of our account managers. And he was on the phone for 6 hours talking about the business. That doesn't happen these days for all sorts of reasons. But what has fundamentally changed is that clients expect or assume that the agency understands their business. It's beholden on the agency to understand, and if you don't understand, to actually ask. And with what is online now, it's much easier to actually get a really good understanding of not only the client's business, the competitors, and the market. And unless you do that, you can't do great creative work. Unless you do that, you can't really have relevant proactivity. When we ask questions in surveys to clients, we don't ask just about proactivity. We talk about relevant proactivity, because clients don't want you spending your time working on something that is actually not relevant to their business. And, what we often find is that agencies' knowledge of a client's business is best when the agency pitches, because it devotes a large amount of time to actually understand the client's business. What many agencies don't do is continually invest in the understanding of the client's business.
And that's not helped, frankly, by the fact that these days there's so much churn in staff. And this is happening on both sides, right? So the reservoir of knowledge does not exist in the same way that it used to. If you've been on if there's a lot of movement on the client side and the agency team are consistent, then there's a reservoir of knowledge that helps you through that. If there's churn on both sides, it's even more difficult. But it's a bit like, if you think about it, you've got to, when you were in school and you were doing exams, right, you had the revision period, right? You just got to keep up with what you think is going on in the business. If you don't know, you've got to ask, because you can't deliver an appropriate solution unless you know exactly the state of the client business. And if the client isn't telling you enough, you need to tell them, you're not telling me enough. I need to know more in order to be able to do this job better.
I think you had a story, Carey, from when you first started out in account management years ago, where you you created a specialism for yourself to research your client's business, and you became
So it was one of these things. So when I joined the agency that I joined, then I remember having a conversation with the bloke who hired me, and he said to me, "What you need to do," he said, "is you need to make yourself the go-to person on something. So make sure you become a recognized expert on that." And so at the time I was working on a beer brand.
Wasn't difficult then, was it?
Yeah, well, I don't know why they put me on a beer brand, I can't think, Anyway, they were, I was. And so what I decided to do, I was going to become the team expert on competitive advertising and the spend and what people were saying in the ads, so that when you had these meetings, even though I was the junior guy, right, they'd say, "Carey, what do you think? You've done all this work on spend and creative work analysis and all this kind of stuff." Now I give my opinion, and they may disagree with my opinion about the creative, but the point is, it was establishing a point of difference for me and a perceived expertise that I could leverage.
And I mean, we have to all admit that things have moved on. The effort that it must have taken you to do that, Carey, all those years ago, because it was very manual, wasn't it? It was manually. I used to have a pile of trade press, and my job was to cut out clippings and put them in a scrapbook.
No, that's right. And we were told, I remember being told, so, when you did in those days, and of course it's all moved on now, but we were told, send your client a piece of interesting news about their business every day.
And today, it's
easier to do that today than it was then. Well,
let's get on to the subject of AI, okay? Because clearly everyone's talking about it. Mm-hmm. Generative AI has just exploded. Agencies are embracing it, primarily for internal efficiencies. Clients are noticing as well. Everyone's catching up at the same time. So, Simon, do you want to talk a bit about what clients are perhaps saying about AI that they're not communicating with their clients or with their agencies?
I think we're in a transition period at the moment. Clients are still coming to grips with AI. As you know, AI policies are being formulated. It still surprises us that so few, relatively few, clients actually have formal AI policies in the UK, both internally as well as externally. I know you know that that's very different in the States, and it's something that's going to hit here. And agencies need to be aware of that. It's interesting from the conversations that we've been having with some clients that whilst they may have formal AI policies, brand and marketing managers are circumventing that by actually doing AI research on their phones rather than their company computers. But AI is having a profound impact on all businesses. Certainly from the research that we've seen and what clients are saying, envisaging about 30% of jobs will either be lost or created as other jobs. We're seeing a polarization of some people really embracing it, other people sticking their head in the sand. Certainly our view is you haven't got to be driving the bus, but you've got to be on the bus. And it's an investment in time. It's going to enable smaller agencies to compete with the big networks. And I wouldn't want to be running a big network at the moment with the impact of AI. I mean, there are certain things that worry and concern us, that some agencies are looking to really shortcut the creative process. And indeed, some clients are actually driving this. That a client will actually brief an agency. The agency will do a lot of prep work with AI, and the clients will come in for the creative meeting, and that can happen within days, in some case hours. One of the things that worries me is that a lot of agencies are using note takers, the Otters, the Fathoms of this world, particularly for meetings, but particularly briefings. And if that data is going into an LLM, if I was a client, I'd be really, really worried about this, because if you're giving commercially valuable information and that's going into something that can be ultimately sourced, I think you need to be very, very careful about that.
Absolutely. And it's something that I think I'm talking about with my account management community about, the minimum, ask permission before you record or use a note-taking app for any client conversation. Because absolutely, yes, particularly with client sensitivity and, confidentiality, it really has to be something that everyone takes very, very seriously. On the point of briefings, I think, Carey, the last time we spoke, you were talking about what clients aren't saying to their agencies about preparation of briefs and how long is actually spent on preparation of briefs. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that always amazes me is that is how, certainly when I worked in the agency business originally, briefs were pulled over by the client, and we always had a written brief, right? And if you've got a written brief, it means somebody's thought about it, distilled it, and put it down on a piece of paper and sent it to you. And often these days, I talk to agencies and they say, I said, have you been briefed on this? Well, yeah. So what do you mean? Well, yeah. What do you mean by that? And they, well, yeah. So the client basically, we had a conversation, and the client briefed us over the phone for about 5 minutes. And I said, and was that followed up? No. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the fact that the client thinks they're giving you a really good brief in 5 minutes? Well, obviously, unless it's a very simple task, giving you a very good brief in 5 minutes is not very good. So what you need to do then, we think, is to go back just to make sure that I've understood. Here is the brief that we will work to, and you replay that in written form. Because if it's in written form, it's distilled and it's accurate and to the point, without any sort of bluster and lack of precision. So when you're having a briefing, and clients do spend less time these days, there's no doubt about that. They spend less time briefing the agency than they used to. So if they're not giving you, as an agency, the brief you want, write the brief you think they are trying to give you, get it back to them in written form, and ask them to validate it.
hope you enjoyed my chat with Simon and Carey, the co-founders of Relationship Audits and Management. Because they have so many tips and insights into what our clients are actually thinking and what they're saying about us, we've made this a 2-part series. So coming up on the next episode, which is 121, we will be continuing to ask Simon and Carey what else the clients are saying. In the meantime, if you would like to talk to either of them, then you can either go to their website, relationshipaudits.com, or you can send them an email at info@relationshipaudits.com. And finally, if you are in an agency account management role and you'd like to be kept up to date with the next episodes that I'm going to be sharing on the podcast, and you also want tips about the account management role and any trainings that I'm doing in the future, then you can sign up for my newsletter. And you can do that by going to my website, which is accountmanagementskills.com. I look forward to speaking to you on the next one.